Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. I'm Ian DeMars alongside co-host Ryan Solomon. And Ryan, we got a lot to talk about this week. There was the NFL wild card this weekend. We saw some interesting news in regards to coaching changes in the NFL. But I think we need to start off with what just happened in the national championship game for college football.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And one of the most anticipated title games in recent memory because of how often these two teams have played each other. People are expecting this to be a very close, very contentious game. I think that most people were probably predicting another title for Alabama, but Clemson came in and just absolutely stomped on the Crimson Tide in this game.
Yeah, and you look at it, this was round 4 of the college football battle between Alabama and Clemson. You look at the past 3 matchups, Alabama winning the first one, Clemson winning the second one in that last-second effort from Watson to Hunter Renfrow. And then obviously last year we saw Alabama just came out and dominated Clemson. But this game just had a different feel to it. You had two very young, hyped quarterbacks in Tua Tagovailoa and Trevor Lawrence for Clemson. And when you came in, before the game started, as much as I remember, because we talked about this last week, as much as I had said Clemson was going to win, I was also kind of curious to see how Clemson was going to start with Lawrence. And you saw early in the game that he did struggle a little bit, but I think he got a little bit of confidence once we saw Tua throw that pick 6 to start the game. And right from there, it became a shootout early on. And then suddenly we saw something that we rarely have seen against Alabama these last few years, and someone was able to shut down that offense.
Yeah, and I think the big question when you look at this game is why? Because you look at these two teams and you don't think that there's really that much of a difference. Like, you don't think that this game, just looking at the rosters and looking at their body of work, should have been 44-16. And what I can kind of come up with is that Clemson is filled with players that this was their goal. Like, they wanted to come back and they wanted to win the national championship. And a lot of them would have been high draft picks last year had they not returned. So you look at Christian Wilkins on the defensive line, Hunter Renfrow. He wouldn't have been a top draft pick, Hunter Renfrow, but he's come back to play again. And this team was just filled with guys that, like, this is what they wanted to work for. This is what they wanted to achieve. They wanted to get to the title game and beat Alabama. And they really went through a lot of adversity over the course of the season, with Trevor Lawrence taking over and the team having to rally behind him. When they almost lost to Syracuse during the season, that was a big turning point for them. And this team really bonded, and they seemed to actually fit well together. Like, these guys wanted to play for each other. They wanted to play for Dabo Swinney, whereas Alabama kind of just seemed like they were rolling along through the season without a whole lot of obstacles that they needed to overcome. And I think in the end that hurt them, because their only real test was against Georgia. So Clemson came in kind of battle-tested. They already got a lot of those issues that they had out with their quarterback stuff going in the early part of the season. And then the two teams met, and Clemson was just way more hyped for this game.
Yeah, and you look at Clemson, obviously they had the quarterback controversy to start the season. Who is going to be their guy? And if you look at what happened when they did go with Trevor Lawrence as the quarterback, you have to look at a couple things. When you compare Kelly Bryant to Trevor Lawrence, obviously you have the experience with Kelly Bryant and also the running ability with Kelly Bryant. But something that you see with Trevor Lawrence is that he has a lot of similarities to Deshaun Watson, and you could even say he has some things that make him better than Deshaun Watson. I definitely think that Lawrence is the better passer and has the best accuracy out of the 3 quarterbacks that I just mentioned. The running part of the game, we didn't really see too much from him, but he does have that dual threat capability. And we did see a little bit of that later on in the game once we got to the 4th quarter. And even though Trevor Lawrence is only a true freshman, remember, this guy started 4 years, all 4 years in high school. And he has state records for yards and touchdowns in Georgia, records that were previously held by Deshaun Watson. This guy is a game changer. We saw that today, and there's a very good chance we're going to see that for at least the next 2 years at Clemson, because this team's been a dynasty that's on the rise, and I think they're about to take over this Alabama dynasty that's been taking over college football for the last decade. That's how good this team is. The offense is basically returning everyone, only losing Renfro. You look at defense, they do lose some key pieces, but they still have Venables as their defensive coordinator. This team's going to be great for the next few years on. This team could be the next big dynasty. I think that they could possibly overtake Alabama if they were to play again next year. Now, we do have to bring that up because they do have played the last 4 years in the college football playoff. So, Ryan, do you think next year we will see round 5 between these two teams?
I mean, it's really possible because, as you said, they both actually have a lot of returning players that are going to be key. Alabama is showing no signs of slowing down. They had another strong recruiting class. Clemson, as you mentioned, returning a lot of players, but they are losing some defensive linemen, which is going to hurt them because that D-line was really dominant. But who do you really see around the college football landscape that has any chance of stopping them? I mean, even look at the other two teams in the college football playoff. Notre Dame clearly didn't even belong, and then Oklahoma was losing their dynamic quarterback. So it's those two teams. They're going to be the 1 and the 2 again next year. And I don't really see anybody stopping them, to be honest. So we could definitely be in line for round 5 of the Clemson-Alabama matchup.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at anyone that could maybe jump into the conversation, I mean, you could possibly look at the Big Ten. You could look at maybe a Georgia that could still stay in. I mean, they're going to be returning Jake Fromm. They're still going to be a very solid team that can compete with Alabama. LSU made some very strong strides. I'm still not sure how the offense is going to be for that team, but they're improving. But I do think that there are going to be some teams that might compete with them. But obviously, I think these two teams, Alabama and Clemson, are going to be the top teams, at least for the next few years. And it's going to be tough to see someone overtake one of these teams.
Why don't we put it this way? They're going to be favored probably in every game that they play until they get to the college football playoff. And if a team does knock them out of the college football playoff, it's going to be an upset, and it's probably going to be big news.
I definitely agree with you on that one. A team that you could say had a possibility to maybe do that once next year comes could have been Ohio State. Yeah, they lose Urban Meyer, but we did hear some news this week that their starting quarterback from this past year, Dwayne Haskins, we'll move on now, is actually going to be declaring for the NFL draft. It wasn't really sure if he was going to come out or not, but with Justin Herbert and Oregon now staying at Oregon for another year, this makes Haskins the top-rated quarterback coming into the draft this year. Do you think he has the potential to be a first-round pick for coming out of Ohio State?
I think he does have potential to be a first-round pick, but I don't think he's going to be a first-round pick that's going to pan out. So the NFL right now, teams are desperate for a good starting quarterback. You can see the impact that even a marginal quarterback has on an NFL franchise. And the guys that can actually, take over a franchise, be a building block for a team for years are few and far between. So when the teams that are drafting see that Haskins is arguably the best quarterback coming out, they're going to take what I would consider to be a gamble on him. And I say gamble because if you look at the quarterbacks that have come out of Ohio State, they all are sort of a similar model where they're pretty dynamic with their legs. They put up huge numbers. They win in college. And then when they get into the NFL, they kind of disappear. They don't show up in the way that they did in college versus players that are more athletic, that are bigger, that are faster. And a lot of those Ohio State quarterbacks aren't necessarily great pocket passers. So if you look at going back to Troy Smith, you look at Cardale Jones, you look at Terrell Pryor, none of these guys made it in the NFL. And I don't see Haskins as being hugely different than any of these guys.
Yeah, and I do have some question marks because you kind of look at it and he kind of has the similar – I'm not necessarily saying he is this guy, but he has a similar skill set, I guess you could say, as Mitch Trubisky when he came out of college. And I'm not saying statistical-wise, I'm just saying start-wise. Remember, this guy only has started basically one full season at Ohio State, put up ginormous numbers in the Big Ten. But when it came to bowl season, we did see that the Big Ten didn't look as good as they did during the regular season. The majority of their teams did lose. Ohio State was one of the teams that did win. But obviously, yeah, he's the best quarterback that's going to be coming into the draft, who I think has the best potential to start a career. And like you said, he could easily tumble down later on in his career, as we've seen from some of these Ohio State quarterbacks. But if you're looking at the current draft order, I mean, easily I could see him going in the top 10 because you look at some of the teams that are picking in the top 10. You have the New York Giants, who are more than likely going to be moving on from Eli Manning, if not this year at some point. You look at the team behind them, Jacksonville. They've had issues at quarterbacks. It doesn't look like Blake Bortles is going to be the guy going forward. And you look at, if not that, maybe you see him slip to 10 to Denver. I mean, Case Keenum didn't necessarily play that great this year, and they really don't have a solid backup quarterback. So easily the best quarterback currently on the board, I would say, and easily I think at this point could fall into the top 10.
Yeah, and when you look at this, it's kind of the necessity of the position, as I mentioned. So if the Giants decide that they want to part ways with Eli Manning, they're going to need a quarterback. You're most likely not just going to go with your backup. You could spring for one in free agency, perhaps. But you're going to probably evaluate these quarterbacks. And if somebody likes Haskins, they're going to take him in the first round. I mean, if you look back at it, quarterbacks that are successful in college usually do find a way to get drafted fairly high in the NFL. Perfect example, Tim Tebow. I don't think any of us coming out of college would have said that Tim Tebow would have been a first-round draft pick. And it's questionable whether he actually panned out or not, because he did have success when he started to some degree in terms of winning games. But we wouldn't have thought that he would have been a first-round pick. And Denver must have loved him when they took him in the first round. So I wouldn't be surprised if someone took Haskins in the first round. I don't think he's really a first-round talent, but that need has to be filled by somebody. And right now he's one of the top players coming out.
Yeah, and you look at it, it's a rarity nowadays where we don't see at least one quarterback taken in the first round. And it's not necessarily because they're not that good. It's just some of these teams are not willing to wait until later in the draft to possibly get the quarterback that they do want. They have to take that opportunity to pick where they are, or even trade up at some point. Unfortunately, could hurt them if they trade up too soon and end up picking a potential bust at some point. You look at the QB draft class this year, it's an okay draft class. I mean, besides Dwayne Haskins, you got Drew Lock coming out of Missouri, who put up huge numbers. You got Will Grier from West Virginia, who's played very solid, had a great career. So there are some good quarterbacks. I'm not sure if any of these are going to be like a franchise quarterback or anything in the NFL, but definitely it wouldn't surprise me if Haskins is a first-round pick. It would be possibly a stretch to see him go up high, but just looking at some of the teams that are in the top 10, would not surprise me at all if he does get drafted out there.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're kind of in agreement there that he's probably not really a first-round talent, but the need is there. Some team is going to pick him, because really the only other quarterback that I could see maybe going in the first round could potentially be Daniel Jones from Duke. So there's a lot of room out there for somebody who's a quarterback who can play at a decent level to get taken highly in the draft, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one. And we're only a few months away from the NFL draft, so that's just something we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, we still got the NFL combines and the colleges pro days as well. So those will be something definitely keep an eye out for over the next couple of months. But now let's shift over to the NFL and start talking about what it looks like to be the first official coaching change in the NFL for some teams that have already started their offseason. And it started with the team that you said that could be the one to hire first, and that was, or the most attractive destination, that was Green Bay, as the Packers have looked or are in position to hire Tennessee Titans offensive coordinator Matt LaFleur to be their new head coach. Do you think this is a good fit for the Packers? And do you think that was a good idea for them not to do second round of interviews?
I think that the Packers have bought into the idea that they need to find somebody who's the next Sean McVay. And so if you look at LaFleur, he has worked closely with Sean McVay in the past. He worked with Jared Goff, and we know what Jared Goff is doing right now. He worked with Matt Ryan when Matt Ryan was really at his peak of upping his game. So I think that the Packers have seen this guy in action working with quarterbacks, and they want to get the most out of Rodgers while he's there. So they're looking for a guy who can be sort of the next dynamic coach in the NFL who's going to be the next Sean McVay. is really what I'm getting at with that. They want the guy who's going to be the next Kyle Shanahan. So it's kind of a chance on LaFleur. He doesn't have head coaching experience, but he's worked with a lot of guys that have been successful in the NFL. So it's an exciting hire, I think. It's one that it's either going to be boom or bust. I don't see him having really an average career at Green Bay. I see him either making that team excel to the next level, or that team's going to really start declining and kind of stay down for a while.
Yeah, and you look at the hire and you look at what he just did this past offseason. Tennessee, they did rank towards the bottom of the NFL in offensive statistics. But you do have to look at that team. Remember, one of their best playmakers, Laney Walker, missed the majority of the year. Marcus Mariota was banged up for a decent chunk of the season. And they really didn't know who was going to be their feature back in the backfield until later on in the season when Derrick Henry took off. So I would say you can kind of throw those numbers out of the way. You kind of have to look at the past. And like you just said, he worked with Kyle Shanahan when he was great in Atlanta. He worked with Sean McVay when they were great in LA. I do think that this could be something that is good for the Packers. I do like the fact that there are rumors that they're looking to possibly keep Mike Penn on board. I think he improved that defense. I think they're making strides in the right direction with the defense. So I like the fact that they're looking to keep him. And even Joe Philbin, because he's a solid offensive coach. Not sure what they would actually do with him if they keep him as OC or not. But I do like some of those moves. And I think this could be a very solid move for the Packers. Obviously, it's going to depend on what he does his first year, but he's only got a few years left of Rodgers from what we see, and hopefully this is a good connection or good relationship for LaFleur and Rodgers going forward.
I really do like that they didn't go with a guy that's already failed as head coach in the past, though. So, like, they got Jim Caldwell in, and they got Josh McDaniels in for an interview, and those guys have already shown that they are not reliable head coaches. Caldwell already with multiple teams, and then Josh McDaniels with, I think it was the Broncos a few years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was with the Broncos.
With the Broncos, and then almost with the Colts until he bailed and went back to New England. So I'm glad that they didn't go with a guy who has already failed as a head coach. They're giving somebody new a chance. And I think this is really a Hail Mary pass. Like I said, this is either going to be boom or bust. They're going with a guy that a lot of people thought would be a really good coaching candidate. And we're going to see what happens. And it's exciting to have change around Green Bay, though. I have to say that.
Yeah, definitely. I think this could be a solid, fresh start for the Packers. They just got to figure out some things in the offseason, whether it be in the draft or free agency. And this could be a huge offseason for Green Bay. Last year was the start of it, getting rid of some people head of the house. But I think this could be a really good sign for Green Bay.
Yeah, I would agree with that in full. Like I said, it's exciting. We'll see what happens. I'm hoping for big success out of the Packers, but you never know with them and with new coaching hires. But hey, we had some playoff games this weekend, and we actually got a lot of really interesting storylines out of these games. So let's start with probably the most compelling game of the weekend, and that was the Philadelphia Eagles and the Chicago Bears. I'll just paraphrase the game for you. Mostly a defensive battle all the way through, but the last couple minutes of the game were really exciting with Nick Foles taking the Eagles down the field, scoring a touchdown, but failing to get the 2-point conversion, leaving the Eagles up 16-15. Mitch Trubisky orchestrates a drive with under a minute left that takes them down to about the 35. And then Cody Parkey set up with a kick. First kick he makes, but a timeout was called by Doug Peterson. Second kick looks like it's going to hook left, starts to cut back in, hits the left upright, hits the crossbar, and no good. The Eagles end up winning 16-15. So, Ian, the first question about this game I have for you is, we have now seen Nick Foles take the Eagles to the Super Bowl and win once, and now out of obscurity this year to a huge winning streak to make it into the playoffs and now into the divisional round of the playoffs. Is Nick Foles the guy that the Eagles should actually hold on to as their starting quarterback of the future?
Of the future? I'm not sure he's the quarterback of the future. I think he's the quarterback for now. Carson Wentz is your quarterback for the future. We've seen what he can do. Obviously, this year I think was a little tough for him coming off of the ACL injury. But I think this is something that is kind of a win-win situation if you're the Eagles. Because Nick Foles isn't the youngest quarterback, so obviously you can use him for the rest of the year, obviously. And you want what? You can, if you want to pick up his option, pay him some money next year, pay him money, and you want to what? If you think he could do the job, have him be a quarterback next year. However, there's another option you could look at. If he does so well for you, you could trade him and get some good assets back for him. If he does get you to a Super Bowl or play well if they lose in the playoffs. Also, remember they still have Carson Wentz, and I don't have really any doubts about Carson Wentz. We've seen what he can do. He was an MVP caliber quarterback last year before the ACL injury. He was putting up some good numbers this year. They were just kind of inconsistent for the most part. But I think that Nick Foles is their guy now, and if they keep him next year, for one more year. I don't think beyond that, I don't think he's going to be their guy because they invested a lot in getting Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz has shown that he can be a franchise quarterback. They're not going to try and trade Carson Wentz because I feel like they'd be losing a lot after giving up so much for him. The thing is, if you trade Nick Foles, we've seen what happened with Nick Foles when he's gotten traded, obviously, before. We've seen the downside of him not playing in Philadelphia. It seems like when he's in Philadelphia, he just plays phenomenal and can play at a all-pro type of level. And I think that right now Philadelphia has to take advantage of that and hope that he continues to play well. Or you can trade him and win big in the return.
Here's the thing that nobody seems to get about this situation is that everyone's obsessed with having a franchise quarterback. They're obsessed with having that guy that can win in any situation, the guy that you can hang your hat on, the guy that you can sell the most jerseys for, the guy who's going to be the best player on your team. However, Nick Foles has already won a Super Bowl with the Eagles. He has done the highest level of achievement that you can do in professional football. And not only did he win the Super Bowl, he got MVP of the Super Bowl. So to some degree, it's a little ridiculous that people are saying, yeah, sure, Nick Foles won the Super Bowl, but they have Carson Wentz, who's a franchise quarterback. I mean, what could Carson Wentz have done? Won the Super Bowl better than Nick Foles? They already achieved what they wanted to achieve, and it shows that Nick Foles is the guy that can do that. And to make it even more clear, in a season where Carson Wentz already ran that team into the ground by having spotty quarterback play, Nick Foles then picks up the pieces and leads them back into the divisional round of the playoffs. How can you argue with that?
You do make some points. I'm just saying, like, if we're looking at the future, I'm looking at least 5 years down the line. I'm not sure if I see Nick Foles being in the NFL 5 years down the line because this game continues to change and change every year. And it gets to that point where a lot of what we're seeing now is a lot of what we're seeing in college football. And I'm not sure if we can see Nick Foles continue to adapt to that. Remember, we haven't seen him play a full season. We've only seen him play parts of the season, whether that be the beginning or the end of the season like we've seen this year and last year. So I need to see this from a full season of Nick Foles because we haven't never really seen a full season of Nick Foles before. We've only seen him come in at either like midpoints of the season or sporadic points of the season. We've never really seen him play a full season. So until we see him play a full season, I can't say that he can be a franchise quarterback or a quarterback of the future because we've only seen him play parts of the season. And yeah, he can be a great quarterback when it comes to the postseason. We've seen that. But just because he plays great in the postseason doesn't mean he can play like that a full season. You want to know what? He could start the season, he could play like this midway through the season and then tumble down the stretch. Easily could happen. So until we see him play a full season, I can't say he can be the future for the Eagles.
But here's something else you're not thinking about is why was Nick Foles playing at all last year? Why?
Well, why was he playing?
Yeah.
That was because Carson Wentz obviously got injured.
So why is he playing this year?
Another injury to Carson Wentz.
Right, exactly.
I see what you're going to do.
Yeah, so Carson Wentz in consecutive years now has been injured to the point where he can no longer play. So we're talking about durability issues for this guy because he's been injured 2 years now in a row. He has not been in the league that long. And Nick Foles has been very steady, and he has not gotten hurt nearly as much as Carson Wentz has. So if you get rid of Nick Foles and you have Carson Wentz and Carson Wentz goes down again, then all of a sudden you're looking at a lost season Whereas with Nick Foles, he seems a little bit more steady, a little bit more durable. I guess the point I'm just trying to make here is that the teams try to search so hard for a quarterback that can have chemistry with their team and make their team better. And it doesn't really seem like Carson Wentz makes their team significantly better than Nick Foles does. Because something about rallying around Nick Foles just gets this team going. It's kind of like the Vikings last year with Case Keenum. I wouldn't say that Case Keenum is a better quarterback than Kirk Cousins, but he might be a better quarterback for the Vikings than Kirk Cousins. And it seems like Nick Foles is a better quarterback for the Eagles than Carson Wentz. I think if you put these two like on a neutral team that doesn't have any history or anything, Carson Wentz outshines Nick Foles every time. But in this particular team, there's something about him that gets those guys to rally around and play better.
So, based off of that, are you saying that they should keep both of them depending on what happens this season? Or do you think that they might try and look to trade Carson Wentz possibly? If you're saying
what I think they should do is keep both of them next year. Pick up Nick Foles' option for one season because I bet he wants to stay in Philadelphia. Let Nick Foles play as the starter to start the season. Say that you're waiting for Carson Wentz to rehab because you don't want him to get hurt again. You want to take extra precaution with him and see how Nick Foles does. If he struggles, then you can put in Carson Wentz. You don't have to think about it ever again. But if he continues to succeed, then I think you actually have to put real thought into him being the quarterback. Because if you look at some of these other quarterbacks that are now legends like Tom Brady, Drew Bledsoe was originally the quarterback when Brady came in, and Brady was he like a 6th round pick?
Yeah, 6th round pick.
Yeah, he wasn't a highly touted guy. He was kind of like Nick Foles in a way, but a little bit younger. He comes in and never gives the job back. So it could be a situation similar to that where you have a guy that could be your future, but maybe there's another guy that for some reason fits better with the team. So that's what I would do. Is let Nick Foles start next year, see how it goes. If it goes well, maybe you should think about keeping him, trading Carson.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a possibility. If the Eagles do play well enough and continue to move on in the playoffs, that definitely could be something. But I want to stick on the conversation of quarterback issues. So I want to go to Baltimore and the Baltimore-Los Angeles game. In that game, we saw Baltimore just struggled horrifically throughout the first 3 quarters of that game. Seemed like they were going to get blown out of the water later on in the game once the Chargers found the end zone. Lamar Jackson struggled throwing the ball, just seemed out of sorts, was fumbling the ball. And then he found a little bit of a spark in the 4th quarter, leading them to a little bit of a comeback. But the question remains, if they would have benched Joe Flacco to start the second half, does that team win the game? Remember, they're only down 12-0. I want to get your take on this first, Ryan. Do you think that they should have benched Lamar Jackson at halftime?
So I'm actually a fan of Joe Flacco. I think that Joe Flacco is actually better than Lamar Jackson is. So if it was my team, I think that I would have benched Lamar Jackson. But when you look at the position the Ravens are in, it's very clear that they want to move on from Joe Flacco. So the best case scenario if you put Joe Flacco in is that they come back and win the game because of Joe Flacco outshining Lamar Jackson. So all of the build-up that you just had with Lamar Jackson taking the team to the playoffs, Lamar Jackson being the future, suddenly goes out the window, and suddenly you have a quarterback controversy of, do you need to keep Joe Flacco longer? Is Lamar Jackson ready? Is Lamar Jackson actually the future? Is Joe Flacco the present and the future? So I think that the Ravens have decided to move on from Flacco already, and putting him in at that point is just making danger of making that decision look bad down the road.
I can agree with you on the point that they're ready to move on from Joe Flacco. But here's something you have to remember about Joe Flacco. When Joe Flacco entered the league, I believe he won at least one playoff game his first 5 years in the league. Remember, this guy had, got to 2 or 3 AFC championship games in his first 5 years and won a Super Bowl. This guy has been phenomenal in the playoffs. It's obvious they should have benched Lamar Jackson at halftime. Heck, I would have even benched him at some point in the second quarter, but because the game was so close, obviously I think you had to keep Jackson in at that point. But you're down 12-0. It was 12-0 at the half, and you needed a spark. You have to go to Joe Flacco because remember that these two teams played a couple weeks ago, so obviously the Chargers knew what they had to do going forward. They had to make Jackson make plays with his arms, and he was struggling doing that in the first half. They really weren't able to get anything on the ground as well, and we had saw him, he had fumbled the ball a couple of times. If they would have put Joe Flacco in the game, I think that would have gave them the spark that they needed. And who knows, they could have did what they were doing earlier on in the year and kept Jackson in the game to run some interesting trick plays that they've tried doing during the regular season. I think that would have been the right play for them, and I think that would have given them a lot more momentum. Now, we did see Jackson got things going, but he got things going too late in the game. Remember, there were some crazy plays that happened in the game that kind of kept those drives alive. And remember, he fumbled at the end of the game that cost them their comeback, unfortunately. But Joe Flacco is such a good quarterback when it comes to the postseason. You don't really see him turn the ball over, and he's able to throw the ball very well. I think they needed to do that because they weren't running the ball. They had to throw the ball, and Jackson wasn't doing that. So they needed to bench him, and I think that's why they lost the game.
I'll get on board with that. Like I said, if I was trying to win the game, I would have put in Joe Flacco. But I really don't think winning the game was necessarily the Ravens' goal this year. I think they were trying to make a transition from their older quarterback to the new generation that they see running their team. And I think that getting to the playoffs is just a bonus that solidified the fact that they made the right decision. So I think to them, they said that this playoff run that they made, winning the division, getting to the playoffs, it was a great thing. It made them look good in the eyes of the fans. And I think they just did not want to backtrack on that. So I think that you're right. I agree with you. That's the best thing that they could have done to win the game is put in Joe Flacco. He does have a phenomenal record in the playoffs. He really comes to play in those situations. But I think that they just did not want to chance him revitalizing the team and then fans saying, hey, wait a minute. You can't get rid of this guy because he just brought us back in this playoff game. And I think that's the big reason we didn't see Joe Flacco.
Yeah, I can definitely see that point of it. Obviously, you've invested a first-round pick in Lamar Jackson, and unfortunately, I'm not saying that cost them. Obviously, he brought them and got them back into the playoff picture and helped them win that division. So he definitely deserves all that credit. I just think that obviously you could see some nerves and the flaws that he had coming into the league showed up again in that game. Unfortunately, it did hurt them. But the future does look a little bit brighter for them. Who knows if we'll see Harbaugh back. There are rumors that they might let him go, but that's something we'll just have to wait and see over the next coming weeks. But let's flip back now over to the Eagles and the Bears game. Now, as we had mentioned, the Bears lost the game on what was originally ruled a missed field goal, but was later changed to a blocked field goal, as replay showed that an Eagles defender did tip the ball on the play. Now, Cody Parkey actually had tied for second most misses in the league this year, and I believe they had said 6 or 7 of his misses were off hitting the crossbar.
Yeah, it was like a ridiculous amount, considering how unlikely it is to even hit the crossbar.
Yeah, and you look at this was a year where we saw a lot of kickers get cut because of some of these big game opportunities. So with that said, do you think that the Bears are going to be letting go of Cody Parkey after the season does wind down for them?
Man, I think they have to let him go. I think with all the misses that he had this year, there was that one game where he missed like 3 field goals by hitting the upright, which is pretty outrageous. And then them being in prime position to win their first playoff game in such a long time after having such a remarkable season, and the fans actually booing him as he's running off the field, I think you have to let him go. If the Vikings let Blair Walsh go when he missed that field goal against Seattle, you have to let Cody Parkey go too. I get that it was tipped. I get that it may have potentially gone in if it wasn't tipped, but we will never know. And this was just such a huge miss that culminated a really poor season for this guy. So you have to go find another kicker at this point. It's too important of a position for you to hope that some guy is going to do better.
Yeah, and the thing is, before even that kick happened, Cody Parkey was having a very good game. I believe he had 3 field goals in the game before that kick. And you look at the situation, it's tough because obviously a lot of people are like, well, if he does get caught, that obviously that's the reason why he got cut. That one kick right there wouldn't be the reason why he gets cut. We see a lot of kickers miss kicks in the postseason, and they're still the kicker the following season. As we had mentioned, this guy had missed or second most kicks in the league this year, and obviously playing in Chicago, it's a tough place to play at since it is an outdoor stadium, and cold weather can play factor into it sometimes. But that's just the trend that we're seeing nowadays in the NFL. We're seeing some of these kickers that are just struggling and can't really find their place. Unfortunately, that causes them to move. Look at Daniel Carlson at the beginning of the year for Minnesota. That guy struggled drastically to start the season. He goes to Oakland, misses his first kick, and then makes every kick after that. So maybe Parkey just needs to find a new home. That could possibly be it. But I'm not necessarily saying that that kick cost them the game. Remember, they gave up that long touchdown drive at the end of the game where they easily had opportunities to get stopped the Eagles, and they didn't. And their defense has been the thing that's been carrying that team. So this loss shouldn't be blamed on Cody Parkey, even though he did miss that kick.
You can't necessarily blame him for the entire loss, but when people remember this playoff game, they're going to remember his missed field goal. They're not really going to remember the drive down by Philadelphia. They're going to remember how that team was in a position to win and their kicker missed the kick.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Let's touch base on the other games that happened. Let's first talk about the Colts and the Texans. The Colts ended up dominating the first half, winning the game by a final score of 21-7. And Ryan, you were the one saying basically the whole year that you were not feeling the Texans, and you want to what you looks like you were right with that first that wild card playoff loss. What did you see in that game that kind of made or shows that you were right about the Texans?
Well, I mean, you just saw Deshaun Watson's inability to create plays in crunch time, and you saw the inability by them to really stop the Colts running attack. So the offense never got going with Deshaun Watson. They struggled a lot. They just don't have the same explosiveness that they had last year. A lot of their wins came against teams that weren't really good, weren't even above 500, definitely not playoff teams. And then the Texans defense just got manhandled by the Colts offensive line. So the Colts ran all over the Texans. That defense that should be pretty good with J.J. Watt wasn't able to get enough pressure because the O-line of the Colts, which was much maligned for most of the early part of the season, is actually probably one of the better units now in the NFL. So we didn't see them putting the same kind of pressure on the Colts that the Colts were able to put on the Texans. Deshaun Watson was uncomfortable all day. And yeah, judging by the body of work and what the Texans were doing, it was easy to see them losing when they played a team that was actually decent. And we saw them lose to the Colts a couple of weeks ago, and now we saw them lose to the Colts again. I want to also point out that I had not been feeling the Bears all year either until they beat the Rams. So I've been not hyping those two teams up all year, and now I feel justified.
Yeah, you did make a very solid point on that. You were not for real on both those teams for the majority, or for basically all of the year. You look at the Colts, a couple of things that show that they have improved. Andrew Luck is getting protected, and he's not falling down, which is a huge sign of relief for them because obviously he's had some injury issues the past few years. So seeing him healthy and being protective is a huge sign that this team is moving in the right direction. Marlon Mack had a phenomenal game on the ground, and T.Y. Hilton always seems to perform well against the Texans. And he had a very good, strong start to the game and was key for them on third downs in that game as well. And then you look at the Texans, you can just tell that defense is getting old. They have great playmakers on that defense, but they're just an older defense. So unfortunately, even though the offense is looking like they're on the rise, it seems like that defense is starting to take a step back now.
Yeah, and ever since J.J. Watt got seriously injured, he has not been the same dynamic playmaker that he used to be early in his career. So we haven't even really seen any remarkable plays by him. We haven't seen any deflections turning into interceptions. We haven't seen anything crazy happen from him lately. So that defense just didn't rise to the occasion here. The Colts really dominated the game. It looked like the score actually should have been farther away than it actually was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cowboys and the Seahawks. Because again, that I had mentioned last week that whichever team wins the running battle should win the game, and that's exactly what happened. We saw the Cowboys did a very solid job running the football, and we saw Seattle struggle during that. And an interesting thing happened later on in the game. We saw Sebastian Janikowski left the game after or at the end of the first half with what looked like a leg injury after attempting a long field goal. Possibly could have played a factor into what happened at the end of the game. Remember, they scored a touchdown late. They went for two, and they got the 2-point conversion. But then they had rookie Michael Dixon doing the onside kick. And no disrespect to him, but I've seen Janikowski do some interesting things with an onside kick. And I've seen some things from Dixon too. And Dixon's a phenomenal kicker. This guy is all pro and made the Pro Bowl. But I think in that situation, I would have rather have the veteran in to do the onside kick. And who knows what could have happened in that case. But I thought overall that was a very good game. Overall, would you agree?
Well, going on the kicking thing, the onside kick attempt was very strange. It was more like a pooch kick that just kind of hung in the air and went right to one of the players on the Cowboys. It wasn't really a play that gave the Seahawks any chance to recover it. Going to the game, all I've seen from it are highlights because my cable provider is in a feud with Fox Sports. So I was not able to see the game, which was on Fox. So I saw the highlights, and it was pretty back and forth. And Russell Wilson actually almost brought them back at the end, so that was interesting. But it seemed like a pretty standard playoff game. It was one of the closer ones that we've had, but it wasn't anything that seemed too special. It was two teams that were pretty evenly matched. I think the Cowboys will probably lose in the next round to the Rams, just as I think the Seahawks will lost in the next round too.
Yeah, definitely agree. It was a good game, and I'm guessing that you would have had Spectrum, and that's why you didn't.
You are correct, Ian. You have read up on your sports cable feuds.
Because I was actually getting set to watch that game too, as I also have Spectrum. Did see that huge, long, ongoing message that continues to run as I checked today. But luckily, I have a antenna box that I was able to watch the game on, so I was able to watch the game. It was a good game to watch. I'm not sure if they had the I would say the tension that we saw from the Sunday games, but I definitely thought it was a good game that might be a little bit overlooked as we look at it. But it was definitely a good win by the Cowboys. They do have a tough matchup next week, and then against LA, and it should be an interesting matchup. And we will definitely talk about those games as we get towards the end of the show. But let's move back to the NFL coaching search. So former Texas Tech head coach Cliff Kingsbury, who is now the USC offensive coordinator, was looking to interview for some head coaching vacancies. However, USC originally blocked this opportunity for him due to a new NFL rule that has taken place this year, which allows college coaches or athletic departments to block permission for teams to speak to anyone on their staff. But it looks like now Kingsbury is going to get that opportunity. Not sure if that means he's no longer at USC or not, but looks like he will get that opportunity, and there were reports that he could look to get hired by either the Cardinals or the Jets. Do you think that he's going to opt to the NFL without ever even being the OC for USC?
I think that's pretty likely, because if he's showing interest in interviewing for those jobs, that means he is not settled on his job with USC. And really, when you think about it, if you have high aspirations of being a top-level coach in any level of football, how could you pass up a chance to go to the NFL? Especially when the Cardinals and the Jets both had coaches that didn't get it done. There's really nowhere to go but up from here for either of those teams. So he could come in and experience a relative degree of success right away with either of those teams by just being better than subpar.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And we've seen what he's done with some of the quarterbacks that are currently in the NFL. I mean, you look at Patrick Mahomes. He's also done some work, I believe, with Johnny Manziel, or even though Manziel's not in the NFL anymore.
Maybe we don't want to tip the hat to that one. Maybe he should pretend he was far away from Johnny Manziel.
Yeah, but he's turned great college talent into high draft picks in the NFL, I'll say. And for some of those draft picks, they've had success in the NFL, like we've seen from Mahomes right now. So I think you put him on a team with young quarterbacks, either Arizona and Josh Rosen or a New York Jets and Sam Darnold, he could develop those quarterbacks into franchise caliber quarterbacks as they did draft them in the first round, draft them in the top 10. So obviously they do see him as a franchise quarterback, but we did see both those quarterbacks struggle this past year. So I think you put Kingsbury in one of those places, I think he could develop those quarterbacks very well over the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you make. And we brought it up earlier where basically with LaFleur, they're getting him for Rodgers with the Packers. And it's all about the quarterback right now in the NFL with a league that's so interested in scoring and passing and running up the numbers through the air. That's what teams want. That's what franchises want, is that quarterback. If you have everything else around your team falling to pieces, but you have a dependable franchise quarterback you can rely on, everything is all good in that city for the most part. And like you mentioned, it is a pivotal time for both of those quarterbacks in New York and in Arizona. So it's time that they get somebody that can actually work with them and develop them with Darnold and Rosen. And otherwise, they might end up as lost high draft picks and lost prospects. I mean, we've seen it happen before with David Carr in Houston. We've seen it with almost everybody that goes to Cleveland. These highly talented guys end up being failed by coaches, really, when you look at it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that point. It'll be interesting to see what happens because I think when he took the job at USC, I think he was thinking at that point he wasn't going to get too many opportunities in the NFL. But with all the head coaching changes, obviously that brings it back to attention that teams want him. And because of that, I don't think we're going to see him coaching in college. I think he will venture over to the NFL. Whatever team picks him up, I think we'll find a good one overall. But let's switch topics now and talk about something that we talked a little bit about last week, and that has to do with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this leads into our question of the week last week, which basically touched about the Steelers and basically was discussed Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown. Question was, of the two, which one do you likely see staying with or being a Steeler next year? And you look at Brown currently is under contract, but we talked about the issues that he had towards the end of last year or towards the end of the season where there was some conflict, didn't show up for a practice, and then as a result, didn't end up playing in the final week of the season. He's now not going to be playing in the Pro Bowl, being replaced by teammate Juju Smith-Schuster. So looking at the results, the majority of people on Facebook and Twitter favored Antonio Brown returning to Pittsburgh and being a Steeler next year. Do you agree on this, or do you think that we could possibly see both not return?
Well, I think out of the two, it's clear that Le'Veon Bell is most likely gone. I think Antonio Brown could potentially stay. I could really see it going either direction there. Ben Roethlisberger still has, 1 or 2 good years left. And if he and Antonio Brown can actually mend whatever issues they're having in their relationship, I could see Antonio Brown sticking around. He is still under contract, like you said, so they may not want to put the effort into moving him at this juncture. They might, in a couple years, want to move him when Roethlisberger is done and when they're kind of turning the franchise over to the next generation. We saw Juju Smith-Schuster coming up, and he's probably going to be one of their future stars in the receiving department. But I think that right now, you still have a chance to win a Super Bowl or at least get pretty far in the playoffs with Roethlisberger and Brown, who are very talented. So I think they might want to try to keep them. I think that they can try to figure out whatever their issue is.
Yeah, I think obviously the fact that we're probably going to see Bryant could stay is likely because he's on a contract. For some reason, I don't think either are going to be a Steeler next year. Obviously, Bell's had the issues, didn't play this year, didn't sign the franchise tag. It's not looking like he's going to come back. But you look at Antonio Brown, he is seeing issues with this team, and I think he finally made aware of it during Week 17. Remember, they still had a chance to make the playoffs before the game started at Week 17. So he could have played a factor into them making the playoffs. And obviously, Baltimore won, so basically ended their chances of being in the playoffs. But they still had the opportunity, and he decided to take things out during that last week. Shows that he doesn't want to be a part of that team anymore. He doesn't like the direction they're going in. So I think because of that, they're going to look to try trading him once the season is fully done. I do think that they're going to get something good for him. but I don't think we're going to see either of them back next year.
I mean, that's possible. And it's crazy to think about that considering how tight that team seemed. It seemed like they were going to be an offensive juggernaut. And it's weird to think about how quickly that turned around now. Because we were just talking about, the three Bs in Big Ben, Brown, Bell, and that being the best offense in the NFL, and now it's just completely disintegrated.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Hopefully, like you said, it'd be nice to see if they can get things to work out, but I don't think it's going to happen. It doesn't look like it. It seems like that they're getting ready to move on and could possibly be in the start of a rebuild within the next year or so. But with that, let's move on to this upcoming week's divisional round games. Now, looking at our upset picks from last week, Ryan, you made a bold prediction, and you went with 3 upsets, and you did get 2 of those upsets right. So that gives you now 8 correct upsets this year. I picked 2 upsets last week. I did get both of those right, so I move up to 10 correct upsets this year. So looking at the schedule this week, Ryan, do you have any upsets that you want to call?
Man, I thought about this honestly immediately after the playoff matchups for the divisional round were finalized. Like, I think about this podcast all the time. You don't even realize. And I think about trying to find a way to get back on top of our upset picks. But for this week, these games are all really close, in my opinion. They could really go either way, most of them. I see the Saints as most likely being somewhat of a lock over the Eagles. The only reason I'm tentative is just because we know what the Eagles can do with Nick Foles. But I think the Saints are going to win that. I'm tempted to say the Chargers over the Patriots, but then I remember that the Chargers from LA are going to have to go into the sub-zero temperatures of New England and play a team that's dominated them in the playoffs. You look at the Cowboys and the Rams, I could see the Cowboys potentially winning, but I don't think that they have enough firepower to beat the Rams. And that brings you to the Colts and the Chiefs. So these two teams have some history of playing each other in the playoffs. I remember one year when I was in grade school, the Trent Green, Dante Hall, Priest Holmes Chiefs were one of the best teams in the NFL, and the Peyton Manning-led Colts came into Arrowhead and beat them in the divisional round. I think something similar is going to happen this week. And I think the fact that the Colts were able to roll the Texans, the fact that the Colts have been playing for their playoff lives for the past 4 weeks, basically ever since they went down 1-5, actually, is going to help them because they're already in survival mode. The Chiefs, this is Patrick Mahomes' first go-around in the playoffs. Andy Reid hasn't had a great time getting the Chiefs to win games in the playoffs recently. I think this is set up perfectly for the Colts to shock the Chiefs and then end up playing the Patriots in the championship round of the AFC.
All right. And you look at that pick, that's not actually a bad pick because you look at it, I was watching the games this weekend and then looking at stuff online. I believe from what I saw, the Colts actually are 4-0 all time against the Chiefs in the postseason. I do remember the last time they played in the postseason, that was the game where the Chiefs were in Indy and they got off to that huge lead. And then Andrew Luck led. I think they were down 31-10 and came back and won that game.
Yep, it was another pretty ridiculous way for the Chiefs to lose a playoff game.
So, if anything, I would base it off of that you could easily pick the Colts. I'm not going to pick the Colts, so I think that the Chiefs are going to win that game. I think they're going to find a way to get through. They are at home, or Arrowhead, they play at Arrowhead, right? I'm blanking on the stadium. I want to say it's Arrowhead.
Yeah, it's Arrowhead Stadium.
Okay, it is Arrowhead. So I think that's one of the loudest stadiums in the NFL. So I do think that the Chiefs win this week. I like the Rams to win at home. I think that they learned last year from their first home playoff game that they're going to be able to learn or that they'll be able to use for this or upcoming week's game against Dallas. I do like the Saints at home. I think that there's just too much for them. And I'm going to go with the Chargers over the Patriots. And it's not just because I picked the Chargers to get all the way to the Super Bowl. But here's the thing. We've seen something different about this Patriots team this year. They don't look dominant. They look like that they're good enough to stay in a game. But we haven't really seen a dominant game from this Patriots team. And you look at the Chargers, we've seen them dominate some teams. We've seen them win impressively on the road. You look at this past week, that game against Baltimore, that was an impressive win. They almost lost that game, but that was an impressive win. And then a couple weeks ago, they went into Kansas City and won in one of the toughest stadiums in the NFL. I think that they're going to continue this success and they're going to advance to the AFC Championship game, which would mean another matchup against the Chiefs. But my upset will be the Chargers over the Patriots this week.
I hope that happens. I would really like to see Philip Rivers and the Chargers beat the Patriots and end up going to the Super Bowl, to be honest. But I just have a hard time believing that he can take that team into Foxborough and beat the Patriots. And one of the things that he mentioned is we haven't really seen the Patriots play a dominant game this season. And I would counter that by saying we haven't seen the Patriots play a playoff game this season. Because you know that when it gets cold in Foxborough and Bill Belichick is devising ways to make other teams miserable in the playoffs and he has a bye week to prepare, that they're going to be ready to play. And regardless of how they've looked this season, they still ended up 11-5. They still ended up 8-0 at home. And even though the Chargers have a great away record, I just don't see the Patriots losing this one to the Chargers.
Yeah, that'll definitely be interesting to look at. I just look at the fact that they've played in the playoffs before, and when they play in the playoffs, I believe it was back in the day when Michael Turner was a Charger, and the Chargers had the team that could win that game. Unfortunately, I believe they had some missed kicks in that game, and they didn't convert on some fourth downs that they had short yardage on. But I think that they're able to turn this around. They have one of the better backs in the league in Melvin Gordon, and they have like two of the best backups in the league in Austin Eckler and the rookie Justin Jackson. They have great wide receivers, and remember, Hunter Henry just got activated this week, which means he's eligible to play, and he's a huge playmaker for that team when healthy. I'm not sure how much he'll play, if he even will play this week, but even if you put him in as a decoy, that's going to be something that can be the difference in the game.
That's a valid point. Like I said, I would like to see the Chargers win. I really would. I would like to see them come out of the AFC and like to see Philip Rivers actually get a ring. I think that would be great, but I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, that'll just be something we'll have to wait and see. They play the first game on Sunday this week, so definitely keep an eye out for that. But as we usually do when we get to the end of our show, we talk about fantasy football. And I know fantasy football is over. We're going to talk about an interesting topic here. So I was at a wedding a couple months ago on one of my friends was talking. It was not my wedding. It was at a buddy's wedding. And a couple of my buddies came up to me. They run a fantasy football league, and they had asked me, like, how would you feel if what would your thoughts be on someone getting kicked out of the league on life? And I was like, well, what exactly would the criteria be? So that's what we want to discuss this week. Ryan, what would your criteria be for kicking someone out of a fantasy football league?
Sure. I feel like you could kick someone out of a fantasy league if they were basically just taking up space without actually trying. So you've probably been in those leagues before where they'll draft or they'll just auto draft, and then on a weekly basis they won't try to pick anybody up. They won't set their lineup. They just end up as basically a useless team in there that just loses all their games and basically is a punching bag for everybody else. I think in that scenario you would want to kick them out of the league and just say, okay, you don't actually try at all. We're going to get someone in there that's going to be more competitive, and then let them go and bring someone else in. That would be the reason that I would kick somebody out.
Okay. A thing I want to bring up to you on that point. My friend who I was talking to, who I will not name because things could escalate in that way, but he had told me that the person that he'd want to kick out does that exact same thing. He drafts, doesn't do anything else during the regular season, doesn't change his lineup or anything, but yet this guy finishes in the top 4, top 3 of the league every year.
How?
So, I have no idea how. I tried asking him how, and he's like, he doesn't know. He just somehow auto drafts good players and ends up finishing in the top 4. So in that case, if that's the case right there, are you even able to kick him out of the league?
I think that's hilarious. If that's the case, I would just leave him in for the sake of trying to beat basically the computer-run team. Like, that's hilarious then. I mean, if there's somebody else you really want to get in, then just say, yeah, I'm kicking you out. Somebody actually really wants to be in this league who's actually going to try. But if there's nobody else that really wants to get in, just let him stay then, I say. See if he can actually win the league someday.
Yeah, definitely a good point there.
Or talk to the guy. Talk to the guy and say, look, if you want to be in the league, you're going to have to actually pick up different players. You're going to have to actually set your lineup. Otherwise, we're going to find someone else, Because if he actually cares, then if he knows that you're going to kick him out, maybe he'll start trying.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point there. I'll look at my league, for example. Last couple of years, we've had a guy in the league who's either auto-drafted during the league and doesn't really do too many moves, or just doesn't make any changes when he obviously needs to make changes. You look at this year, for example, the guy who took last place in our league, you could tell at points he wasn't changing his lineup, but when it came for him, in the league I run, last place has to buy first place a case of beer of their choice. So when it came down to that, he actually did pay and did do that, even though he didn't do too many changes to the lineup. So even in that case, since he was willing to do it, obviously he's willing to be in the league. I'm not sure if he's going to want to keep taking last place if he plays at that rate. But definitely, I think when it comes to it, that's one of the factors. Another factor I think you have to look at is if you're like a paid league or a league where you have to give up fees at some point, if they don't give the fees up at a certain time, I think that's something that could be the reason to kicking someone out of the league. Example could be one of the leagues I ran a few years ago. It was a $10 buy-in, so it's not too expensive of a buy-in. But I think we had to wait a whole month and a half after the season before the last person paid. Now, fortunately, there was only one person that had to pay, and the last money prize was just money back. So when they saw that person, they paid him, but it was over a month and a half until that happened. I think in that case, if they don't pay by a certain time frame, then I think they have the right, or that commissioner of the league has the right to kick that person out.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. When it comes to not paying your money, that's also a reason to kick somebody out. Or how about this? If they just make you mad, just kick them out.
Exactly. I'm dealing with that in a league I'm in right now, and I might try pushing the guy to kick the guy out. But that's something I'll definitely keep you posted about over the next few months.
Solid. Also wanted to let you know that since the 7:15 game on Saturdays on Fox, I'm going over to your house to watch it.
Okay, if you're able to do that, feel free to do so.
Glad we have an agreement.
All right, Ryan, since we're at the end of the show, do you have anything left that you want to say to our viewers?
Yeah, everyone, thanks again for listening. It's always great that this podcast continues to be supported by listeners and that Bruce Sports actually continues to grow and add other podcasts. Make sure to check out Run It Back, our NBA podcast, if you have the time. Those guys on there, Sam and Eric, are really great, and they're very passionate about basketball and the Milwaukee Bucks. So definitely check them out and ask some questions or write some comments, and also follow us on Twitter if you haven't already. What are you waiting for?
Yeah, as Ryan said, give us a follow on Twitter, give us a follow, or give us a like on Facebook. I believe, as I was just updating, we're only 4 likes away on Facebook from hitting 100. So if you haven't already, give us a like on Facebook. Also, if you haven't, give us a follow on Twitter by using the handle @TBWN2's podcast. I believe we're at 140 on Twitter right now, so we're definitely increasing on that daily. Again, thank you everyone for listening to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays. Again, we're the official football podcast of Bruce Sports. Like I said, make sure to listen to us each week on either iTunes, Google Play, or Spreaker. And then, as Ryan had mentioned, also give our buddies basketball podcast, Run It Back, a listen as well. And then hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll get our baseball podcast going soon. So again, thank you everyone for listening this week. Enjoy the divisional playoffs this week, and we'll get ready to talk about them next week. Take care, everyone.